All right, so you're ready to dig deep into personal freedom, huh? And you've given us quite a challenge, a classic, I might add. Harry Browne's How I Found Freedom in an Unfree World.
A classic for sure.
Yeah. This book has been around since 1973. Can you believe that?
I know.
And it still resonates with people today, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah, it really is.
So let's dive in and see what we can unpack, especially for you listening right now.
You know, what's interesting about Browne is that he doesn't try to sugarcoat things. Like, he starts by acknowledging that the world can feel, pretty unfree.
Right.
But, and here's the catch, he makes this bold claim that true freedom is possible no matter what's happening around us.
Okay, that's a big statement. So how does he even define freedom? Is he talking about, like, going off the grid, some kind of utopian ideal?
Not really. Browne is very, very practical.
Yeah.
So for him, freedom is actually quite simple. It's basically the ability to live your life as you want to live it. And he recognizes this urge, this human urge that we all have to make our own choices and create our own paths, right?
Right.
And he argues that that's possible even within the systems and structures that we find ourselves in.
That's pretty empowering, actually. But if it's that simple, why do so many of us, myself included, feel so stuck? Like, we're not really the ones in control of our own lives.
Well, and Browne addresses this directly. He identifies 14, count them 14, common thought patterns, which he calls traps. Traps. And these traps, they kind of subtly sabotage our freedom. Think of them as mental barriers that we often don't even realize are holding us back.
Okay. 14 traps, though. That's a little overwhelming, I got to be honest. Where do we even begin with that?
Well, let's start with a couple that might resonate with your situation. I know you mentioned earlier, like, feeling frustrated with some of your coworkers and how unpredictable they can be.
Yeah, totally.
So this is where Browne's identity trap comes into play.
The identity trap. Okay, tell me about this. How does this work?
Basically, it boils down to this. We tend to assume that other people think and act the same way that we do. We try to predict their behavior based on our values, our experiences, our own knowledge.
Right.
But Browne says that we fall into a trap when we forget that everyone is operating from their own unique perspective, their own unique set of knowledge and experiences.
Oh, so instead of me getting frustrated trying to figure out why my coworker is doing this thing that seems completely illogical to me, I should consider that maybe they have a totally different set of information or motivations that are driving their actions.
Exactly. It's not about, like, excusing their behavior, but it helps you detach from this feeling of being, victimized by their actions,
Right.
It kind of puts you back in the driver's seat of your own reactions.
That's helpful. That's a very helpful reframe. Okay, so the identity trap. Any other traps that might be relevant here?
Well, I know you're, very focused on increasing your personal freedom, right? So let's look at the utopia trap.
The utopia trap.
Yeah. And this is the one where we tell ourselves, oh, I'll be happy when, fill in the blank, right?
When I get that promotion, when I finally go on that vacation.
Exactly. Or when society finally gets its act together. Right?
Yeah. I fall into that one all the time, I think. It's so easy to just kind of put your happiness on hold, waiting for those perfect circumstances.
Right. And Browne argues that this kind of thinking, that actually prevents us from taking action in the present moment. It's like we're giving away our power to these external forces,
Right.
And he suggests we flip the script, that we focus on what we can control and actually start building our own version of utopia now, regardless of what's happening around us.
Wow. Okay, so it's about taking control, being proactive. I like that. It's a powerful, powerful shift in perspective. It's about focusing on personal empowerment rather than waiting for the world to change, which, let's be honest, might never happen.
Right, exactly. And this leads us to another really key idea from Browne, which is this whole idea of the pursuit of happiness.
Okay.
He basically argues that everything we do is ultimately an attempt to increase our own happiness in some way.
That makes sense on a very basic level.
Yeah.
But don't we all define happiness differently? What makes me happy might make someone else miserable.
Absolutely. And that's precisely why Browne emphasizes the importance of understanding your own unique emotional nature, right? Like, what brings you joy? What triggers your stress? What are those things that once you understand how your emotional system works, you can start to align your actions with what truly makes you happy.
It sounds like he's encouraging a good dose of self-awareness there.
He is. And he even challenges, this very common view of selfishness. He argues that since everyone acts in their own self-interest, we shouldn't feel guilty about seeking our own happiness.
Okay. That's a bit controversial, I think, because we're often told to put others first.
Yeah.
To think of others before ourselves.
He's not, he's not advocating for being inconsiderate of others or their needs, but he introduces this idea of what he calls efficient selfishness.
Okay. Efficient selfishness.
Mm-hmm.
I like how that sounds already.
It's about recognizing that other people have their own desires, and instead of demanding sacrifice from them, you can actually look for win-win exchanges.
So it's like finding those situations where your happiness and someone else's happiness can coexist, can align.
Exactly. It's about collaboration rather than competition. And he even applies this concept to, to how we view government.
Oh, now things are getting interesting.
Mm-hmm.
What does efficient selfishness have to do with government?
Well, Browne sees government as a classic example of what he calls the group trap.
Okay, the group trap. We've got the identity trap, the utopia trap, and now the group trap. I'm taking notes here.
You got it. And so he argues that government programs, which are, often funded through taxation, try to impose a single set of values on a very diverse population.
Right.
And he believes this approach is inherently inefficient and can actually diminish individual freedom.
Can you give us an example of how this plays out in real life?
Sure. Think about car safety regulations.
Okay.
Browne points out that while safety is obviously important, government mandates on those things, they actually limit individual choice. So, someone might prefer a less expensive car with fewer safety features.
Right.
But the government basically takes away that option.
So it's about who gets to decide, the individual or the government.
Exactly. And this, this all ties back to Browne's, his big emphasis on personal responsibility. He's constantly reminding us that we actually have more control than we think, even within a system that might feel very restrictive.
It sounds like he's advocating for a pretty radical shift in how we view the world and our place in it.
He definitely challenges conventional wisdom.
Big time.
Yeah. But he also offers, a path forward. He encourages us to focus on what he calls direct alternatives.
Okay. Direct alternatives.
Yeah.
What are those, and how do they help us achieve greater personal freedom?
So it's about taking action without waiting for others to change or for the system to become magically fair,
Yeah.
It's about recognizing the boxes that we might be living in.
Okay.
Whether that box is a soul-crushing job or a mountain of debt or even an unhealthy relationship.
So getting out of the box requires us to take action ourselves, even if it means, making some really tough choices.
Exactly. And Browne is very upfront about the fact that there's always a price to pay, whether you stay stuck or you break free.
Mm-hmm.
And he encourages you to really consider, what's the cost of staying in that box? Is it worth it compared to the potential freedom that you could gain by taking a risk and getting out?
It's about weighing the long-term cost of inaction versus the potential rewards of making a change, right?
Yeah. It's a really helpful framework, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It is. And it sounds like this is a theme that runs throughout Browne's work, that he applies these principles to everything from, relationships to raising kids, even challenging some pretty traditional ideas about marriage.
He does. He really does. And that's a whole other, can of worms, so to speak.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. How does he apply these principles to something as personal as relationships? And what is this about his unconventional views on marriage? I got to know more.
Let's dive into that.
Okay, so tell me more about how Browne applies his ideas to relationships. He seems to have some pretty radical views on marriage, right?
Yeah, Browne, he dives right into this whole concept of non-marriage, which definitely raised some eyebrows back when the book was first published.
Okay.
He really challenges the traditional view that marriage should, involve merging lives, merging property.
Mm.
And he argues that this often leads to a loss of individual freedom.
Okay, so instead of merging everything together, he's suggesting a more independent approach where each person kind of keeps their own autonomy within the relationship.
Exactly. He believes that true intimacy, it actually flourishes when it's based on choice, not obligation.
Mm.
It's about respecting each other's individuality, even within a committed partnership.
Okay. So I can see how that aligns with his overall philosophy of individual freedom and all of that. But how does this non-marriage, how does it actually work in practice? I mean, it sounds a little abstract.
Well, Browne actually gets pretty specific. For example, he suggests avoiding joint ownership of property.
So no shared bank accounts or co-owning a house. That seems pretty extreme.
Well, it's not necessarily about going to those extremes. It's more about about having very clear boundaries and respecting each other's, financial independence. So maybe one person owns the house and the other person pays rent, or they have separate accounts, but they contribute to a shared fund for household expenses.
So it's about finding arrangements that work for both individuals,
Well,
rather than just blindly following, like, a predetermined set of rules.
exactly. And Browne really emphasizes that this requires open and honest communication.
Right. Which is important in any relationship, I think.
Absolutely.
Mm.
But it's even more crucial in this kind of non-traditional setup.
That makes sense. But, honesty can be tough, especially when it comes to those sensitive topics that inevitably come up in relationships, like jealousy or having, different expectations.
Absolutely, it can be. But Browne argues that honesty, even when it's uncomfortable, is really the foundation of trust. And it allows both individuals to maintain their autonomy without sacrificing the intimacy of the relationship.
Right.
He even suggests visualizing kind of a worst case scenario, almost like to emotionally prepare for those tough conversations.
That's an interesting approach.
Yeah.
I could see how that would take some of the fear out of, having to have those difficult discussions.
Yeah, it's about facing those fears head on and realizing that often the reality isn't as bad as we imagine it to be.
Right.
Browne encourages us to be realistic about our emotional needs, and not to try to suppress them, just to fit some external standard or expectation.
So it's about accepting that we all experience jealousy or insecurity sometimes, and those feelings are valid.
Yeah.
And it's not about trying to, control our partner's behavior to alleviate those feelings.
Exactly. True security, it comes from within. It comes from knowing your own worth and choosing to be with someone who values you for who you are.
Right.
Not for what you can, control.
Wow. This is pretty radical when you think about how it applies to relationships. And it sounds like Browne extends this same approach to raising kids.
He does. He really does. He encourages parents to view their children as separate individuals, not as extensions of themselves, right? It's about respecting a child's inherent right to make their own choices.
Right.
Even if those choices lead to mistakes along the way.
That sounds incredibly challenging, especially for parents who are used to seeing their role as kind of, shaping and molding their child into a certain kind of person.
Yeah. And it is a real shift in perspective, for sure. Browne talks about the importance of teaching children to be responsible for their own property and choices from a very young age. And he even suggests, giving them an allowance.
Oh.
Or opportunities to earn money so they can actually experience the natural consequences of their financial decisions.
It's about giving them the freedom to learn and grow through their own experiences, rather than trying to shield them from every potential pitfall.
Exactly. And he stresses the importance of, honesty and open communication with children, even when discussing, difficult or sensitive subjects.
Right.
He believes that children are capable of understanding complex issues if you explain them clearly and respectfully.
So it's about treating children as autonomous beings who are capable of making their own decisions, even if those decisions are different from what the parents might choose. It sounds like it's a lot about trust and respect within the parent-child relationship.
Right. But, while these ideas are definitely thought-provoking, I think it's fair to question whether they're maybe a bit idealistic,
Right.
Browne's approach requires a significant shift in mindset, both for individuals and for society as a whole. He's really challenging some very deeply ingrained beliefs about marriage, about family, about responsibility.
Yeah, it's definitely not a one-size-fits-all solution. What works for one person or one family might not work for another.
Exactly. But I think the value in exploring these ideas, it lies in questioning our assumptions.
Right.
And considering alternative ways of structuring our lives and our relationships.
So it's about defining freedom for ourselves rather than accepting, societal norms or expectations that might not actually align with our individual values and desires.
And that actually brings us back to another area where Browne really challenges conventional wisdom, and that's the role of government.
Oh yes, this is where he doesn't hold back at all.
No, he doesn't.
He seems to see government as a major source of restriction on personal freedom.
Yeah, he refers to it as the government trap, actually.
Oh, right, because it often tries to impose like a single set of values on a very diverse population through laws and regulations.
Exactly. And he argues that this approach is inherently inefficient and often ends up replacing services that were already being provided more effectively by the free market.
He uses that example of car safety regulations,
Yeah.
right? Where some people might prefer, a less expensive car with fewer safety features, but the government doesn't allow for that choice.
Right. And he believes that government programs, which are often, funded through taxation, can actually end up diverting resources away from more valuable uses.
Right. So it's like forcing everyone to contribute to a giant potluck where you might not even like the food that's being served.
Exactly.
So it's about individual choice and the freedom to decide, how you want to live your life, even when it comes to things like car safety features.
Exactly. Now, it's important to note that Browne isn't advocating for anarchy or anything like that.
Right.
He acknowledges the need for some basic government functions like protecting individual rights, enforcing contracts,
Right.
things like that. But he believes that those functions should be limited to just the bare minimum necessary to maintain a free and peaceful society. Right. He's very critical of government intervention in areas like education, healthcare, the economy.
Mm-hmm.
He believes those sectors are better served by the free market, where individuals have more choice and control.
So in Browne's view, individuals are more capable of solving their own problems and providing for their own needs than the government really gives them credit for.
Precisely. And this ties back to his core belief that individual freedom and responsibility, they go hand in hand.
Mm.
He argues that when we are free to make our own choices, we're more likely to take ownership of our lives and find solutions that actually work for us.
It's an interesting perspective. Yep. Definitely a controversial one, especially for people who believe that the government has a responsibility to provide a safety net for those who are struggling.
Yeah. And it is a debate that continues to this day.
Right.
But I think it's valuable to consider Browne's perspective, even if you don't agree with all of his conclusions. He's pushing us to think critically about the role of government in our lives and to question whether its actions are truly serving our best interests as individuals.
He's reminding us that the government isn't some like all-knowing benevolent entity that always knows what's best.
Yeah.
It's made up of individuals just like us who are just as susceptible to self-interest and biases as anyone else.
Exactly. And he emphasizes that we have the right to question authority
Mm-hmm.
and to hold our elected officials accountable for their actions.
Okay. So we've covered some pretty big picture ideas here.
Yeah.
But Browne also offers a lot of practical advice on how to achieve personal freedom, in various aspects of life. Like he gets into managing finances, careers, relationships, even raising children.
He does. And one of his most compelling concepts, I think, is this idea of direct alternatives.
Oh, right. We touched on that earlier.
Right. It's about taking ownership of your situation
Yeah.
and finding solutions that are within your control.
Right. It's about focusing on what you can do to change your circumstances rather than waiting for someone else to come save you.
Exactly. He gives lots of examples of people getting out of boxes by paying the price to escape limiting situations, whether it's, debt or a bad job or an unhealthy relationship. And he emphasizes that there's always a price to pay, whether you stay stuck or you break free.
Right.
But it's about recognizing that the cost of staying stuck can come and be far greater than the short-term discomfort of making a change.
I can see how that would be so empowering, just to take back control of your own narrative. But can you give us some more specific examples of those practical tips?
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear what he suggests for managing finances, for instance.
Well, he encourages people to be very proactive about their financial futures,
Mm-hmm.
He advocates for avoiding debt, diversifying your investments, and creating multiple streams of income.
So it's about taking responsibility for your financial well-being instead of relying on someone else to provide for you.
Exactly. And he emphasizes the importance of living below your means and investing for the long term.
Okay, that makes sense. What about career advice? Does he offer any insights there?
He does. He encourages people to focus on developing skills that are in high demand and that align with their interests and passions. And he's a big proponent of being an entrepreneur, creating your own opportunities rather than waiting for someone else to give you a job.
So it's about taking charge of your own career path and not being afraid to pursue your dreams, even if it means, stepping outside of traditional employment structures.
Absolutely. He also reminds us that it's never too late to make a change or to pursue a new direction in your career. You're not locked into a particular path just because you've been doing something for a certain number of years.
That's encouraging.
Yeah.
That's very encouraging to hear. Now, you mentioned earlier that he has this thought-provoking exercise called starting from zero. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. So it's a really powerful exercise that's designed to help you create space for the things that truly matter to you.
Yeah, okay.
And he suggests envisioning your ideal life and then eliminating any commitments or obligations that aren't essential to that vision.
So it's about decluttering your life and freeing yourself from those obligations that might be, draining your time and energy without adding any real value.
Exactly. And he suggests making a list of all your current commitments, and then asking yourself, is this truly necessary for my happiness and well-being? And if the answer is no, he encourages you to find a way to eliminate it. Whether that means selling possessions, renegotiating agreements, or simply saying no more often.
That's a pretty radical approach, but I can see how it would be incredibly liberating to free yourself from all those things that are kind of weighing you down.
Yeah. And he also offers some practical advice on time management, suggesting that you identify your most productive hours and schedule your most important tasks during those times. And he's a big advocate for delegating tasks that can be done by others and eliminating distractions that interfere with your focus.
So it's about taking control of your time and your energy so that you can invest them in the things that truly matter.
Exactly. But while all this practical advice is valuable, I think it's important to remember that Browne's philosophy is about much more than just following a set of rules or techniques.
Right.
It's about cultivating a mindset of individual freedom and responsibility. It's about trusting your own judgment and pursuing your own happiness, even if it means going against the grain.
Yeah, it's about creating a life that's truly your own, free from the constraints of societal expectations or government interference or even those self-imposed limitations that we often put on ourselves.
Right.
It's a lot to think about. So what are some of the key takeaways that you think are most important for our listeners to remember?
Well, I think first and foremost, Browne reminds us that we are the ultimate authority in our own lives.
Right.
He calls this recognizing our own sovereignty. We have the power to make choices that shape our destiny.
He also emphasizes the importance of understanding and accepting, our individual nature.
Yeah.
Our strengths, our weaknesses, our unique, desires. It's about embracing our individuality rather than trying to conform to some external standard of what we should be.
Exactly. And that ties into another key takeaway, which is taking responsibility for our own happiness and well-being.
Right.
We can't rely on others to make us happy or to solve our problems for us.
So it's about being proactive and taking ownership of our situation, even when it's challenging.
Yeah.
And recognizing that we have more control over our lives than we often realize.
Right. And another key takeaway is the importance of questioning our assumptions and being willing to consider alternative ways of thinking and living.
Right.
Browne, he challenges conventional wisdom on everything from marriage and family to government and the economy.
Right.
And he encourages us to think critically and to develop our own values and beliefs.
Right.
Rather than blindly accepting what we've been told.
So it's about being open to new possibilities and not being afraid to question the status quo, even if it means, challenging those long-held beliefs that we might have.
Exactly. And finally, I think maybe the most important takeaway of all is the importance of taking action. Browne's philosophy, it's not just about thinking differently. It's about living differently.
So he encourages us to set goals, to make plans, to take concrete steps towards creating the life that we want. It's about recognizing that freedom is not something that's given to us. It's something that we create.
And the journey towards personal freedom, it's an ongoing process of self-discovery and growth and empowerment.
Yeah. It's a journey that requires courage, commitment, and a willingness to embrace the unknown.
For sure.
What a powerful message. I mean, Browne's ideas are definitely challenging and even controversial at times, but I think they offer valuable insights and practical strategies for anyone who's seeking to live a more free and fulfilling life.
Absolutely. He reminds us that true freedom isn't about, escaping the world or avoiding responsibility. It's about embracing our individuality, taking ownership of our choices and creating a life that aligns with our values and desires.
And that's a message that is both timely and timeless.
Yeah.
So before we wrap up our deep dive into Browne's work, I'd love to hear your personal reflections. Like what stands out to you the most from this exploration?
What strikes me the most is Browne's is his unwavering belief in the power of the individual. He reminds us that we have more agency than we often realize, that we're capable of creating the life that we want, even in a world that can feel chaotic and restrictive at times.
It's about reclaiming our power, and recognizing that we have the ability to shape our own destinies.
Exactly. He encourages us to take responsibility for our own happiness, to pursue our own passions, and to define success on our own terms, not by society's standards.
It's about living authentically and creating a life that's true to ourselves.
Yeah.
Even if it looks different from what others might expect.
Absolutely. And he reminds us that freedom is not a zero-sum game.
And one person's freedom doesn't come at the expense of another's.
It's about creating a world where everyone had the opportunity to thrive, to pursue their own goals, and to live a life that's meaningful to them.
That's a vision worth striving for sure.
It certainly is. So as we wrap up our deep dive into how I found freedom in an unfree world, I want to leave our listeners with this thought. If you're feeling trapped or limited or disillusioned by the world around you, remember that you have the power to choose freedom.
Yeah.
You can create a life that's authentically yours and make a positive impact on the world, all without needing anyone's permission.
You hold the keys to your own liberation.
That's a pretty inspiring thought to end on. So go out there and find your freedom. Till next time.
Keep diving.
Man, what a journey. This deep dive into Harry Browne's ideas has been really something.
Yeah, definitely a lot to unpack. He really does give you like a whole toolbox, doesn't he? Like a toolbox full of strategies for creating a life where you feel more free.
I think that's a great way to put it, a toolbox. And what's amazing is how practical his advice is. Like, it's been decades since this book was published.
Right.
But it still feels so relevant today.
It's timeless, And I think one of the things I appreciate most about Browne is he's not afraid to shake things up a bit, He tackles these big topics like politics and economics and relationships, even how we raise our kids. And he does it all through this lens of personal responsibility and empowerment, which I find so refreshing.
Yeah, he really wants us to think for ourselves, to define what freedom actually means for each of us as individuals.
Right.
And then to have the courage to create a life that reflects those values.
And he doesn't just leave us with these big abstract concepts either. He gives us like actual tools.
Real strategies, yeah.
That we can use, to put these ideas into practice in our own lives.
It's not just theory. He's got those frameworks for understanding those traps that we fall into, those boxes we build around ourselves, those subtle ways we end up limiting our own freedom without even realizing it. And then he shows us how to break free, how to escape those traps, how to get out of those boxes and reclaim our power.
That idea of direct alternatives really stuck with me. It's just such a powerful shift in perspective. Instead of getting stuck trying to change other people,
right,
or fix the world, which is often a recipe for frustration. We can shift our focus to what we can control. What are the things that we can do to improve our own situations?
Exactly. Yeah, it's about recognizing, okay, where have I been giving my power away? You know, how can I take that power back? And Brown is very honest about the fact that it's not always easy. There's always a price to pay.
There is.
Whether we choose to stay stuck, whether we choose to break free.
Right. You get to choose your price, basically.
Exactly. It's about looking at the situation honestly and saying, okay, what's it costing me to stay here? And is that cost worth it compared to the potential reward of doing something different?
Yeah. It's a really valuable exercise, I think, to kind of do that cost-benefit analysis.
I agree. I think another takeaway for me that was really powerful was his focus on self-awareness. Like, he really challenges us to understand our own emotional nature, to know what brings me joy, what causes me stress, what are my triggers, how do all of these things influence the choices that I make?
Just like he's saying, really get to know yourself, on a deep level.
Yeah.
So that you can make decisions that are aligned with who you truly are, rather than just reacting to what other people expect of you or pressures from the outside world.
Exactly. It's about authenticity, right?
Yeah.
And that ties into his idea of efficient selfishness, which I think a lot of people misunderstand.
Yeah, it sounds kind of harsh when you just hear those words.
Right, exactly. And that's not at all what he's saying. He's not saying be inconsiderate, be selfish, disregard everyone else's needs.
Right.
It's simply acknowledging that we all have our own desires, our own self-interest. And there's no reason to feel guilty about wanting to be happy.
Right.
But the efficient part of it, I think, is key. It's about looking for those win-win solutions. Like, how can I create a situation where my happiness actually aligns with the happiness of others? It's about finding those points of collaboration.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not a zero-sum game like you were saying earlier.
Exactly.
One person's happiness doesn't have to come at the expense of someone else's.
Right. And I love how he even applies this to how we view government. He really pushes us to think critically about what role government should play in our lives and whether its actions are actually serving our best interests as individuals.
Yeah, he reminds us that, the government's not this all-knowing, all-good entity. It's made up of people just like us, right? Who are just as susceptible to self-interest and bias as anyone else.
For sure.
So it's about holding our elected officials accountable, questioning authority, making sure that the policies that they're putting in place actually promote individual liberty and empower people to take responsibility for their own life.
Absolutely. And I think that's really the heart of Brown's message. It's about empowering individuals to create lives of greater freedom and fulfillment, to realize that we're not powerless. We have the power to choose, to act, to shape our own destinies.
Even in a world that sometimes feels very unfree.
Even then.
Yeah. What an inspiring and hopeful message. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listener with a few final thoughts.
Go for it.
First, just remember that true freedom is a journey. It's not, a destination that you arrive at. It's a process of self-discovery and growth, and it's constantly evolving. So, don't be afraid to question those assumptions, to challenge your own limitations, to experiment, with different ways of thinking and being in the world.
And remember, you're not alone on this journey. There are so many people who are also seeking greater freedom and fulfillment.
Right.
Connect with those people, share your experiences, support each other along the way. It makes a big difference.
And finally, never, ever underestimate the power of your own choices. Every decision you make, every action you take shapes the course of your life.
It does.
So choose wisely, act courageously, and create a life that is truly your own.
Could not have said it better myself.
So until next time, keep diving into those ideas that spark your curiosity, those things that light you up, those things that ignite your passion for living a more fulfilling life.
Did you get any of that?